On today's podcast, we sit down with Benji Stein, artist manager turned tech entrepreneur and the creator of BookingAgent IO, a platform that's disrupting the old school paradigm of live show booking. Benji shares how his experience in the trenches of artist management led him to build a real-time AI-powered search engine that democratizes access to talent buyers, promoters, and venues, leveling the playing field for everyone from DIY artists to boutique agencies. We dig into the hidden gatekeepers of the industry, the power of data in contemporary music careers, and why smart use of technology could be the key to breaking through independently. If you've ever wondered how to get your first show booked or how AI is transforming the business side of music, you can't afford to miss this conversation. Insiders, are you ready?
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's episode, we sit down with Benji Stein, founder of BookingAgent IO, a transformative new platform designed to democratize access to talent buyers and venue contacts for artists, managers, and industry pros at every level. We dive into how Benji is disrupting the old school analog methods of touring with real-time AI-powered data, giving even independent artists the kind of insider access only industry veterans once had. He'll share strategies on leveraging data to build touring success, how artists can compete with major acts, and the role of human intent in an increasingly automated business. Plus, how BookingAgent IO is shaping the future of live music, regional touring, and even expanding access to underrepresented markets. If you're looking to gain an edge in a changing industry or just want to hear what's next for independent music professionals, this conversation is packed with insights you won't want to miss. But first, a word from our sponsor. Hey, Insiders! Are you an aspiring musician, artist, band, or future music business professional looking to take your career to the next level? Well, look no further. At MUBUTV, we offer personalized career counseling and coaching designed specifically for folks like you.
Imagine having both of us by your side, guiding you through every step of your music journey. Our sessions are tailored to meet your unique needs, focusing on critical aspects of your music career, such as refining your songs, defining your artist story, identifying your target audience, and enhancing your social media presence, just to name a few.
Whether you're just starting out or looking to elevate your existing career, we've got you covered. Our comprehensive approach ensures you get insights on everything from live shows to branding and marketing strategies. We understand that every artist is unique. That's why our coaching is personalized just for you.
And here's the best part. We offer flexible coaching packages that fit any budget. Choose from individual sessions ranging from 30 to 90 minutes or save with our discounted 4-session packages. Experience custom sessions designed to enhance your music career with opportunities for greater savings when you choose bundled sessions. Investing in your musical journey has never been more accessible.
Imagine the clarity and direction you'll gain after just one session. The feedback on your songs, the strategies to grow your audience, and the confidence to perform live, all tailored just for you.
So why wait? Don't let uncertainty hold you back. Join us for your free 15-minute discovery call at book.mubutv.com for a transformative coaching experience that will elevate your music career. That's book.mubutv.com.
Hi, this is Cristiana Sudano of Do Less Management, and you're listening to the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.
Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured guest is with Benji Stein, founder of BookingAgent IO, a transformative new platform designed to democratize access to talent buyers and venue contacts for artists, managers, and industry pros at every level. Such an interesting conversation, Eric, for many, many reasons. One of the main ones for me is that I think, and we get into this, touring,
right?
The aspect of live performance is one of the most crucial elements in any artist's career today. And being able to find those contacts, being able to, number one, understand that live performance is crucial if you're to get your career to the next level in today's business. But being able to like reverse engineer, what are some of the successful touring routes by similar artists? What are their gig histories? Who are the contacts you need to contact at that particular club?
Right.
He's put all of this together. We no longer live in an era where it's like, oh, I'm sorry, Eric, we can't get that information.
Right.
That just isn't true. This is something that I've often had arguments with music supervisors over who don't want to be listed in the directory. I'm like, really? What era are you living in? Your name is plastered across 750,000 television screens on that TV show a week, but you think you're going to stay? Really? There's
exactly.
a complete
There's disconnect. Yeah,
disconnect with it, and that's an important component here.
Yeah, and it's funny because it tags on with this, Rich, about old school paradigms still dominating. The live music and booking industry is slow to embrace new technology, with legacy gatekeepers holding closely regarded Rolodexes of contacts. And he talks about this throughout the show, and this is getting back to what you're saying exactly about these old school paradigms, like with old recording contracts that are still outdated and archaic, that need to be kind of just destroyed and just built up from the ground up for today, 2025 standards. So, it's very interesting to hear his take on this and why this part of the industry has been so slow for change.
Yeah, and I think it's become so slow because it wasn't as dominant of a factor in the business, meaning this industry.
Correct.
The live touring business was not as dominant until the last 10, 15 years,
right,
when it really became.
Well, because we went from that copy model to that access model,
Absolutely.
And where a lot of the money was being made on the album sales, that went out. So now this became a dominant force.
Absolutely. Very, very true. I think it's fascinating from that perspective. And he talks about that and so much more.
And with that, insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured conversation with Benji Stein.
Benji, welcome.
Hello. Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you for joining us. I want to start this conversation about BookingAgent IO. You have described BookingAgent IO as a search engine for talent buyers and venues. And I guess my question is, it's twofold. In a landscape that historically has been reliant on, static analog systems, what were the key efficiencies you sought to solve first? And how has AI helped you unlock new forms of value for independent artists and promoters? I know that's a lot, but that seems to be the essence of the creation of this, if you can go into that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to jump right in. And I think, the best way, that's a great question. And the best way to answer it is kind of to start with just a little bit of context on myself. And, I'm formerly more of an artist manager, and I kind of experienced firsthand, first after working a few brief stints at, major record labels and then management companies, and then going on to having my own management company. The music industry is very much an industry that's stuck in a bit of an old school paradigm, relatively slow to adapt new technologies, adapt new practices. And that's particularly the case in booking shows and live events. There's a lot of booking agencies which have existed a long time, a lot of booking agents, and they're very much kind of the gatekeepers to their Rolodex. And those Rolodexes contain all of the talent buyers and the promoters and the right people to get a tour going. And, as technology has slowly crept its way into the music industry, you see more and more kind of barriers for entry. Things like, okay, an artist might need a certain amount of Spotify monthly listeners or a certain amount of hype across Instagram and TikTok before a booking agent is even ready to take a risk on them. And, something I learned as a manager is you can really never take no for an answer. And when I'm developing clients or when I'm developing a new act, sometimes the best way to build that core fan base is to get an artist on the road early. And if you're looking to big booking agents to kind of make that happen for you, you're going to be at a loss. And so what I spent time doing as a manager was oftentimes tracking down these booking agents, tracking down these promoters, taking a developing act and booking that first show myself as the manager, booking that first tour as the manager. And that's not typically, something that people would think a manager does. But when you're doing anything in your power to break a new artist, you have to do whatever it takes. And that might mean becoming a booking agent. That might mean playing those different roles. And I spent so much time and it was extremely tedious trying to, book these shows and find the right people. I figured, there's got to be an easier way to do this. And I'd spent lots of money on things like Polestar and Indie on the Move and these different directories. And, there's a lot of value there. And that was kind of a good interim between a booking agent and, BookingAgent IO. But what I built with BookingAgent IO, it's a real-time search engine that uses, over 20 different sources for events. It uses different things like LinkedIn and, up-to-date ways to find who works where. And it puts that current booking, the right person at each venue right in your hands, the right promoter for each route or each tour, each show right in your hands in real time. And, that's something that's super invaluable. And it was possible before AI, but once AI came out, it made that data enrichment process just so much more affordable and so much quicker that now when you jump into BookingAgent IO, in just a few seconds, you could type in any artist. You're going to get all of their past tour history, all of their future tour history. And then you can click on every event, every booking of that entire tour, and you can see, okay, who's the talent buyer at that venue? Who's the promoter for that specific show? And so if you're a manager, you're looking to break a new act, and you've got I suggest a lot of managers do this. If you've got an artist, find 10 similar artists to that artist that kind of took the arc that you want your artist to take, that grew the way you want your artist to grow, and then study that arc and figure out, okay, what did these other acts do successfully? And that includes touring. If you see, okay, my artist is very similar to this other artist, which has already done that tour route, study that tour route, plug it into BookingAgent IO and target those same venues. And so that similar artist search, that's like a recipe for success that I did when I was doing it manually. And that's kind of the philosophy that I imbued into BookingAgent IO, was like, let me take this problem that I had as a manager and try and use technology to fix it and update it in a way that, the music industry just hadn't done yet. And I think, as time goes on, there's going to be more and more of these kind of solutions using technology. And, music tech is a very broadening field. And there's lots of areas in the music industry which are ripe for kind of a software update, if you will.
A lot of great advice there, Benji. Thanks so much for joining us on the show. I wanted to ask you, with BookingAgent IO, you're going up against longtime industry players such as Polestar, which you mentioned earlier. What drove you to build something new in such an established space, and how do you measure success?
Yeah, that's also a great question. And, it's the music industry is a whole bunch of kind of old school paradigms. And, anybody who's trying to make new ground in the industry has to think outside the box, has to try new things. And as soon as, we see a new artist who tries a new genre or a new twist on marketing, they're instantly rewarded once they become successful. And so, I see any form of progress, every time I talk to an indie artist that has success with my tool, anytime I talk to a boutique agency that's a success with my tool, those are all metrics for success for me. And yeah, it's, I think it's one of those things where you kind of just have to push forward and see what works. And with a lot of those old school directories, they're kind of updated infrequently. You can get great results, but one of the big things that was important to me, especially someone coming from like a DIY manager kind of mindset, is accessibility. And, one of those directories could be a few $100s. When you're first developing an act, a few $100s could be the entire marketing budget. And so my goal was to try and make something that was a little bit more accessible. And so BookingAgent IO is priced, it's like a fourth of the cost of the Polestar directory for booking agent or for talent buyers. And so it's just a little bit more accessible. It's updated in real time. And so you don't have to worry about maybe spending that money, getting, information that's not updated and not feeling like you got the value. And yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for it, not just in the indie artist sector, but just from my network. I've onboarded a lot of boutique booking agencies. I've actually had really great conversations with some of the big booking agencies, and the resounding feedback is, this is incredible. You should keep building this out. You should make this accessible to everybody. And I could very much see, from the small boutique booking agency, from the local indie artists using this to book that first show, book that first tour, all the way up to the CAAs and Wasserman. Maybe the talent buyer at some venue switched and was fired or promoted, and they just want a quick way to type something in and get that new talent buyer information instantaneously without having to make that phone call or without having to make that email, which gets bounced around the venue. They just want a search engine that gets, real talent buyer, promoter, contact information up to date every time they search it. And so I think there's potential for this in workflows across the whole kind of booking scene.
No, that makes complete sense. In listening to you, it makes me realize, you have designed this, a lot of it, for independent and self-managed artists in mind, as well as like mid-tier. My question is, how can access to data help them compete on a more equal footing with some of the larger acts?
I love that. And, I think across all industries, even outside of music, data democratization is something that's just like it's like a signal of the future. And it's something that we're going to see more and more of. I think it's, from my time working at more major labels and working with more established companies, and, I also manage some relatively large acts. This data is already accessible to lots of the people kind of at the tippy top of the industry. Some of these labels, they've built out full data teams and they're analyzing analytics, and they have way more access to attribution. And all of that stuff is essential if you kind of want to expedite your growth as an artist. You want to conduct effective marketing campaigns. You want to conduct effective touring. And so as someone who kind of started more on the music industry side of things, and then came into the music tech side of things. And, I started more at some of the established kind of music players and then had my own management company. I know how important it is for, independent artists and, kind of the more independent side of music to be represented. And that's just like something that kind of stuck with me as a manager. And it's a part of my philosophy and something I think about every time I work on any project. And it's just important to me that, data is accessible to everybody, regardless of where they're at in their career, just so that they can kind of leverage it and get the best results possible. The data is out there. It's just not always accessible to everybody. And the more that things like AI are developed, the more that, music tech kind of grows within the music industry, we're going to see this data becoming more and more available. And you see it across the board, not just in booking. My first project was a playlist data tool, which is a very similar philosophy, playlist supply. And that's basically a data collection tool that just indexes Spotify in real time and collects information about all those playlists, all kinds of data points about those playlists, from the health of the playlist to the growth over time. And in my mind, these were things that, things like that Spotify maybe should have made available on the artist dashboard. And I think if there was like a bit more of a technological progress within booking, a lot of this data would be more available from venues themselves and, from some of the bigger players in live. But, that's not how venues work, unfortunately. It's a very old school kind of industry, and it's slow to adapt. And sometimes it takes a software tool to kind of collect all that information, put it in one place, and make it easy to view, easy to digest. And yeah, there's definitely existing kind of, there's the labels have this kind of information, but trust me, it's not affordable to the everyday artist. And that was something that accessibility was something that was really important to me, was how do we get this at a price point, and how do we get this to be, something that's kind of equitable and accessible to any artist that wants to try book that first show, or someone that was in my shoes maybe 5 years ago or so, booking that first regional tour for a developing act. And you're the manager, and it's your job to just, kick down every door to get your artist growing.
Absolutely. It's a beautiful segue to the next question. Benji, AI tools often are only as good as the human intent behind them. And I'm curious, how do you balance automation and efficiency with the nuances of relationship building and live booking? And which space is that historically thrives on personal trust and reputation?
Yeah, 100%. That's an interesting one. I was at a few networking events recently in LA, and I had some really interesting conversations with some other kind of music industry professionals. And there's a lot of people that they see AI as a threat. They say, okay, I'm looking at the AI music creation and the legal battles it's causing, and I'm reading about, AI's potential to replace me in my copywriting job. And of course, all of that might be true, but as someone who's coming from a technical standpoint, the AI, like you said, it's only as good as the prompt you give it. It's not particularly good at recognizing nuance within itself. And so it's up to you as the user, it's up to the coder, it's up to the person working with it to kind of make that nuance accessible to the AI in a way that the AI is then more efficient. And when it comes to kind of gathering data en masse, when it comes to, for example, when I was a manager, it would take me doing, 20 clicks to find the venue and then click through their website and then find if the email on that website, which is the generic contact email. And then I would go somewhere else like LinkedIn, or I'd go somewhere else like an event page. And I would try to hunt that down. Before I know it, I could be spending 30 minutes to an hour just clicking around, doing a little bit of research, and
just to find one contact. Yeah,
exactly. And AI, if you give it the right parameters, it can kind of supercharge that whole process. And obviously it needs a little bit of access to this API, or it needs a little bit of understanding. Okay, this person's a talent buyer and this person's a promoter, and here's how you differentiate. But if you use AI as a way to kind of just, incorporate it into your process as a tool to increase efficiency, it still requires you doing the work and kind of coaching it, but it can just make that whole process much, much quicker.
Your platform, you've added smart features like email score to help users find reliable contacts. How does AI help you judge credibility, and how do you keep the info accurate and up to date?
So the way that you kind of judge credibility and keep the information up to date is by cross-checking multiple sources. And, that's another thing, that doing that manually is very tedious. But if you do that with AI, you do that with a bit of code and a bit of tech, you can check multiple sources simultaneously. And we use a few different email verification softwares built into the tool in combination with checking things like LinkedIn, which is often where, someone, when they're promoted or when they switch jobs, that's one of the first places they check. And that information is not going to make its way to a venue's website sometimes ever. There's a lot of delay between, the front end of the venue's website changing from when that person might have switched positions. And sometimes those roles change 3-4 times and the website never gets updated. And so we kind of just cross-check as many different sources as possible. And we use third-party email verification software to basically check, is that an active inbox? Is that someone that's, been receiving emails successfully? And that also saves you a step. You might put all that work in at the beginning manually to find the contact, find their email, and then you reach out and you realize it wasn't the right email, or it was a dead inbox, or, you get one of those replies that this person is no longer at that venue. And so all of these kind of additional integrations built into one tool is what allows us to have that, that extra verification, checking multiple sources. And we're pulling event data from a variety of sources too. And so you can be assured, regardless of the genre, regardless of the region, if that artist has performed before, it's being indexed by our tool. And yeah, that's what makes me confident. And I'm talking to artists, and I'm very much someone who likes to be in the field, and every user we have, from the smaller users to the larger, agencies that are using it, I like to talk with them and get feedback and hear, okay, this is a niche electronic artist we're working with, and they actually don't put their events on the Spotify for events panel, or we don't put them on this particular website. This is actually where that event source is. And I'm constantly looking to, add new sources, add new references, and find ways to just make that data enrichment as effective as possible.
Benji, beyond functionality, platforms like yours are also shaping culture by, influencing who gets booked and where. And I'm curious, how do you see BookingAgent IO influencing regional touring patterns or access to underrepresented markets and venues?
I think beyond just giving you direct access to the talent buyers and the promoters and allowing you to kind of pitch in a more direct way for bookings, there's definitely something kind of what I touched on in that first question, where, it also allows artists to do research in a new way. Being able to type in a similar artist to yourself or to your client and see all of their past touring history allows you to kind of analyze, okay, what region did this similar artist to my client first blow up in? Where was their first successful tour that then set them off on the right track? And using BookingAgent IO and being able to do that kind of research, being able to see that touring history before you start to plan and do outreach and contact talent buyers, that is kind of a really new age way to kind of market and to kind of think about artist development. And I could imagine, there might have been in the past like one or two key venues which everyone thinks are going to be indicators of an artist growth or an artist success, but that might not actually be the case. The doing research with BookingAgent IO might be able to show you now, actually, this artist, before they hit that key venue, they were doing this local pub, or they were doing this dive bar. And that, that's where they got that first show that blew up their Instagram, that then took them on their way to getting recognized by that bigger venue. And I think that has a big potential to influence how people do, regional touring and how people look at touring in general. A lot of booking agents, just people who are friends of mine, just from my industry experience, they kind of have in their mind like their favorite contacts at certain venues. And those are going to be the people they hit up first, regardless of if that venue is the right venue for that artist's first show. But being able to be more tactile, being able to think of, which venue you reach out to as a strategic marketing decision, and not just okay, this is who my agent knows, is a whole new way to kind of approach touring as a way to grow an artist. And it can be extremely effective. There's certain regions, certain cities, that are just more receptive to an artist and a new artist at that, stepping in and giving them a chance, and then putting that artist on their back and kind of becoming evangelical fans for that new artist. That doesn't happen everywhere. There's also cities where fans are too cool to enjoy a new artist, or to, kind of become stans at an early age. And so that's all stuff that I think BookingAgent IO kind of opens the door for, is, kind of being able to research touring and research past artist tour history in just like a more nuanced way.
Hey, insiders, we hope that you've been enjoying our featured conversation. Stay tuned because we've got so much value coming your way. But before we dive back in, a word from our sponsor.
Hey, Eric, as an artist, what do you find are the most challenging aspects to a music career, especially when you're starting out?
Well, I think one of the first things is just trying to get the direction of who you are as an artist, where you want to go, where you want to be. And, we've talked about it on the show a lot. Who is your target audience? Who you are? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What do you think would resonate with an audience? And so those are some of the things that I would feel being a new artist. Obviously, what I know now is different because I know these things, but for people that are out there like our audience that don't have necessarily any direction to go, would be the first things that I would start off with.
And having the songs that
Absolutely.
Incorporate those elements that you're speaking of into it. That's so important today.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we started MUBUTV and why we started this new consulting service that we're offering to all of our insiders out there, because that is another one of the big things. I mean, that is the big thing, is like having the great songs. That's what it really starts off. Our friend Don Grierson always said, it always starts with a great song. So that's probably, besides putting together what your audience and what your target audience is the single most important thing. Where are your songs at currently today? Are you collaborating with people? Are you trying to go out to networking events where you can connect with other songwriters and stuff like that? So
yeah, and what are your strengths?
Exactly.
Are you a strong lyric writer? Are you a strong melody writer? Are you a strong musician, a player?
Right.
And it's really important to get really strong clarity on those issues before proceeding.
I totally agree, Rich. And, with our consulting services, we offer a myriad of different packages and we've made it super affordable for everybody. So, if you guys are interested out there in connecting with us on a coaching call, you can visit book.mubutv.com and start off with a free 15-minute discovery call.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That we start with an initial 15-minute call where we can get a sense of who you are, what are the issues that you specifically have, right, and want to work on.
Exactly.
And we can go from there. Absolutely.
Yeah. And we tailor everything to your needs. It's not like a cookie cutter thing. We kind of really want to get to know who you are as an artist, where you at today, what's the snapshot of you as an artist today, and then start trying to craft something that's tailor-made for you. So again, if you're interested, visit us at book.mubutv.com for your 15-minute discovery call.
Hi, this is Ashanti Abdullah, founder and CEO of Turnwell. Are you an insider? I am. Subscribe now.
Yeah, and really quickly, Benji, just a sub question, just for everybody in the audience too, and for me personally, when you mention about plugging in the previous artist history, so that's for any active touring band. So, like, let's say I wanted to look at Muse's touring history, for instance, and just get an idea of the venues and things that they were doing. You can actually plug that in and see that actual information.
Yes, so exactly, you're spot on. That was the first iteration of the tool. And this is coming directly from, my experience as a manager. And what I was doing is we now have a search where you can search by city and you can search by genre. And we've added those features that allow for kind of more broader searching. But the first iteration of the tool, as it was when it launched 6 months ago, was you type in an artist and it pulls all of their past tour history, all of their future tour history, and you can see that on a map interface. And then from that map interface, you can click on each of the venues, each of the tour dates at that venue, and then you get the option to find the talent buyer and the promoter. And
And the info that you're pulling from, where are you gathering that information from, the tour history? I guess other sources that you guys are sourcing that from?
Yep. We pull it from all kinds of places. Basically, all of the online event registries where you might see, touring and events pop up. If you see it in your Spotify, on an artist Spotify page, they now show the upcoming events. We pull from that as well. We pull from Google Events. We're pulling from, over 20 different sources. And so if an artist is on tour or has toured in the past, I can basically say with confidence, we're going to pull that information. And obviously, you want to search for kind of artists that are a good fit for
of course,
whichever your act is. Because if you jump in there and you're managing a brand new metal band and you type in Metallica, for example,
you're not going to be playing stadiums. I get it.
Exactly,
yeah, right.
Exactly.
Benji, it's one of the reasons that I reached out to you is because, I find what you do so interesting. I am in a similar field in that, I've had a company for, I guess, 32 years now, 33 years, called the Music Business Registry. And what we do is we publish contact information for the music business. And, like you, we saw the I guess, limitations of printed directories. I stopped printing directories in 2009. And now we have a subscription service where, we update and we send out a brand new updated edition every single month. And we also have an online component. So like as a change happens, people can subscribe. But, my question to you is, it's sort of a bigger, broader thing that I'm curious that someone with your experience and knowledge would, I think, provide an interesting answer to. Replacing static print directories with real-time AI-driven platforms, like you've been talking about, it signals a deeper strategic shift in the live music business, as you've spoken about. From your perspective, what other outdated systems are holding the live industry back, and how do you see BookingAgent IO fitting into a broader movement to modernize the live music industry's infrastructure?
That's a really great question. And yeah, I checked out Music Biz Registry, and I did my homework ahead of the podcast, and I made sure that, I wanted to make sure everything was super aligned. And I used those registries for a long time. I was a person who was purchasing Polestar. I was purchasing Indie on the Move before I basically developed this idea and decided to go ahead with it. And, it's definitely really interesting, but there's so many elements of live that are kind of ripe for a bit of an update. We already kind of know just from seeing the precedent that's been set that ticketing is something which is kind of overdue for a bit of an update.
Absolutely.
I'm not sure how that's going to happen, but there's very little attribution. That data is very inaccessible. And, ticketing data is something that is such a strong indicator of so many things in an artist's career. And so that's a place where I see it potential. I think on the ground level at a lot of venues, just the way that venues are managed and the way that kind of venues conduct their marketing and conduct their booking, there's a lot of internal ways that I think that could be improved. And even outside of booking, I'm actually in the works right now with a tool for radio data. I've set my sights on anywhere in the industry where data has previously been relatively inaccessible and how I can make it accessible to any indie artist that's looking to kind of, utilize that and strategize that. And so, yeah, I think there's so many different kind of avenues for technology. And, it's really interesting. I started on the music side of things, and then I came into the tech side of things. And I've talked to a lot of founders, and BookingAgent IO was actually part of a little startup competition at Music Tectonics last year. And there's a lot of people that come from the tech side of things, and they come into music and they're building tools for royalties and for contracts and a lot of things which maybe don't necessarily need to be updated. And I think that comes from like a a disconnect and a misunderstanding of where the real pain points are in management or in artist growth or in labels. And yeah, it's going to take, someone else like me, maybe someone who's a venue owner, or maybe someone who's kind of worked in the live scene and ticketing for a long time, to push forward with new ideas and kind of addressing different pain points that they had on that side of things. But I think it's going to happen more and more. I think, music tech is something that's going to be a very growing field in the future, as people realize more and more that technology can just kind of expedite a lot of these old processes that people were so dependent on. And, bookings, live shows, touring is an old industry. It's been around a long time. And a lot of these venues have been around a long time as well. And some of the reasons that they're not changing things is they just don't want to, and they don't see the need, and they've done it for so long a certain way. But once they realize that, it can be done more efficiently, it can save money, it can save overhead, just like artists are realizing with kind of data tools like Playlist Supply or BookingAgent IO, they're going to jump on the opportunity to build new things and try new stuff.
Yeah, without a doubt. And it is interesting to hear you talk about, so I've been in the business for 47 years, and I could not agree with you more when you say that so many of the systems, both within your field and the industry as a whole, are built on old paradigms. And we've seen, if you've been in the business for any length of time, you have seen, and you've articulated it in this conversation, how difficult it is getting people to shift that consciousness, whether it's labels, whether it's agents, whether it's promoters, whether it's venues. Often, it's like pulling teeth, even when and often until their industry or their paradigm literally collapses, like the recorded music business did at the turn of the century. It's a very, very, very difficult path, as you well know. I want to shift gears here for a second and ask you, Benji, throughout your life, have there been any books or films that you have found to be particularly inspiring, professionally speaking, that you could recommend to our audience?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think. I'm not a big TV watcher, unfortunately. I don't watch a lot of TV. I've seen a fair amount of films. One book that comes to mind that I read was by the founder of Patagonia, and it's a book called Let My People Go Surfing. And that's a book that really stood out to me, that really impacted my kind of philosophy and, the way I approach business. And there's, I think it's also very much influenced by working in music, where you're working with a lot of creatives. And, I'm someone who I've played drums since I was like 6. And I was in a jazz band for, high school and college. But my chops were never good enough for me to pursue being an artist myself. I always had a bit of an entrepreneurial and a business mindset. And, kind of that role within the music industry, and something that's very much reflected in that book, is kind of taking a holistic approach. And, in music, there's a time and place to make things profitable. But when you're working with creatives, when you're working with artists, when you're developing something, it's become so transactional. A lot of these labels care more about Instagram followers. They care more about monthly listeners. They care more about TikTok than they do about the music anymore. And they'll see an artist who, maybe has a flash in the pan kind of song going viral on TikTok, and they'll send all their A&Rs to DM them and to call them. But there's been no indicator that this artist is ready for growth, that this artist is, committed to a career of making hits. And that kind of old school A&R mentality, that's something that kind of got updated with technology, which in my opinion, maybe didn't need an update. I love that kind of old school, more holistic approach, or, as a manager or as a, someone on the label side of things. And this is something that's very much talked about in the book, is, kind of seeing the whole picture, kind of seeing the holistic picture, kind of seeing growth as something that needs to be sustainable, not something that needs to be just juiced with numbers and squeeze as much profit as possible. And, if we look at kind of the superstars from yesteryear, a lot of them, they didn't need a TikTok or Instagram to influence the hearts and minds of the masses. And I think that's that book really kind of, it's more about clothing and it's more about fashion, but, there's a lot of similarities in the creativity process of designing something on a pattern or a clothing, to designing, the right song and music production. And so, yeah, that's probably that book comes to the top of my mind when I think of something that was influential.
Great book. And we'll definitely share that in the show notes. I wanted to ask you, Benji, as someone who has worked with artists up close and personal, what do you feel holds artists back from success in their careers?
This might be a little bit controversial, but I think a lot of people are under the impression that they need to go all in order to be successful. I think something that holds a lot of artists back is quitting their day job too early. Something that you need to have in order to build cool videos, build a successful marketing campaign, to experiment with new things, is a little bit of liquidity, a little bit of capital. And you can go all in and hope that you're going to get that first advance. But I've seen it time and time again where an incredible band or an incredible act, they're forced to take that first label advance because they have no other option. And keep the long term in mind and think about, okay, if I'm really looking to become an artist, am I being honest with myself, thinking I'm going to get that hit song this year, or is that hit song going to come in 5 years? Analyze the history of, when did Kendrick Lamar get his first hit? It wasn't when he was 21. You know what I'm saying? And so think about that long-term process. Don't quit your day job. Find ways to make making music sustainable within your own kind of parameters. And that might mean, working a separate hustle while you hit the studio at night. That might mean, budgeting in a certain way to where you can test a little bit of ads, try BookingAgent IO for a month, try Playlist Supply for a month, try these tools and, make it that it's not something where you're all in too early, so that if it doesn't work out, you're feeling kind of some catastrophic defeat. And so that's my advice.
Yeah, that's it is interesting because, when I first heard you say that, I thought, you do have to be all in, I guess, just in terms of a consciousness. But, the points you make are very, very valid. You do need an income. I know, like on the show, Eric is always speaking about, that this is not a free business.
Right.
You do have to spend money on marketing. Just because you have great music does not mean that,
everybody thinks it's a free ride. It's like,
ride,
we're going to give you the money. Yeah. If we have enough faith and believe that somebody will believe in, we'll invest in you. No, you have to invest your own money. And
that's right. Especially today. I mean, your whole business model of BookingAgent IO came from that, old mentality. You realized that there's an opportunity here. And, one of the things that's a philosophy of this show, and one of the reasons we wanted to have you on this show, is because we believe from the marrow of our bones that for any artist to have a career today, they must be educated. They must be educated about the realities of their business. They must be committed to it in terms of learning, because this is not what it was at the beginning of the 2000s. This is a different world today, completely different world. And I guess, on that, would there be any other pieces of advice that you would have for artists who are committed to building a music career for themselves in today's dramatically shifting marketplace?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I really like what you said there with being in touch with the realities of the business and your business. And that's something that a lot of people, they get caught up, artists especially, this is a big reason why the manager can be such an important role, but they get caught up in the creative aspects. They get caught up in kind of the aura of creating something amazing and creating spectacular music. But at the end of the day, it is still a business, and you have to approach it as such. And any business in today's world has startup costs, and you have to be realistic about those costs. And, my advice is like you said, like, do research, make sure you're spending the time digging into so many of the online resources. There's a plethora of information available on the web. And, for most people that's accessible, and it's all it takes is time. And you can dig in on platforms like Reddit, and, you can dig in on all these, different forums and reading the YouTube comments and reading the Wikipedia pages about all these artists that came before you, and kind of learning from their mistakes and learning what their creative process was like. And, kind of really getting in touch with the reality of the music business, and not just thinking of it as some magic where you're going to make a hit song and the song might be the best, but just, you're going to post it on TikTok and you're going to go viral overnight. No, you got to be realistic. You got to think about the long term. You got to think about, how is this business going to be sustainable for me for 10 years? And if I get that hit song, what's next? You know what I'm saying? And yeah, I started when I first launched Playlist Supply. And then now launching Booking Agent IO, my instinct and, just because of my network, the first people to use and access and give feedback to these tools were mostly music professionals, friends of mine that were on label services teams, people at different management companies, my friends who were managers. And, as time went on, I shifted focus to really getting this out to more indie artists and making it accessible to more indie artists and, doing more things on YouTube and just kind of spreading more awareness to general indie artists. And it's, I kind of, after interacting with these artists, I realized, how many of them are really the ones who are in need of these resources and who might not know about them. And my advice is to spend as much time as possible doing that research, staying up late, digging through the internet, and, kind of become obsessed with finding tools like Playlist Supply or Booking Agent IO, or become obsessed with reading about, find that book about that biography of the artist who you think inspires you and whose trajectory you want. Do you want that hit song? Figure out 10 people that got that similar hit song and what they did to get there before you just start posting to TikTok.
Benji, how can people reach you? Is it through your website, socials? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. If you reach out to Playlist Supply or Booking Agent IO on Instagram via DM, 9 times out of 10, it's me in those DMs replying. And so you can go ahead and shoot us a DM. You can feel free to go on our websites and our contact page and emails all on there. So if anyone wants to reach out, I'm super accessible via DM. I'm super accessible via email. And, I'm constantly looking to have conversations like this. I'm a manager first and foremost before I was a music tech guy. And I've got a very DIY philosophy. And that includes, talking with people who are in the field and staying in the field so that I can stay up to date and keep staying on top of what's relevant.
Benji, we want to thank you so much for coming on and doing this. This has been a great, great conversation that has been so informative. And you have touched on so many of the not only important, but deeper and most relevant aspects for artists in this era who are wanting to make careers for themselves. And we're very, very grateful to you. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. I'm really appreciative of the opportunity, and, thank you for reaching out. And I'm looking forward to keeping the conversation going. And thank you again. I'm very appreciative.
Thank you. So many important elements to discuss here.
Yeah.
Number one, this was a great conversation. Obviously, Benji is he's a very important person in terms of developing systems like this. He's on the front lines and he's doing something that's actually very, very much needed. What I loved about this conversation, Eric, was that he spoke about the paradigms, the consciousness, and the realities of what caused him to build this whole system in the first place. This is not somebody who's coming from a, theoretical background. He's been on the ground on the front lines of this. And one of the things that I think he talked about to me that was so interesting was how, there's so many outdated systems that hold back the live industry.
Right.
He talked about the contact information. He talked about the consciousness. But, also I think he mentioned something about, ticketing, which he said is something that's kind of overdue for a bit of an update. I think the quote was, ticketing data is something that is such a strong indicator of so many things in an artist's career. And so that's a place where I can see, innovation and updating. Even outside of booking, I'm actually in the works right now for a tool for radio data. Anywhere that the industry has data that's previously been relatively inaccessible and how I can make it accessible. This is the world we're living in today.
Right.
And part of the thing that makes him so important is that we're going to a much, much more decentralized world.
Correct.
In the world of artists having to do and managers, so much more of this initial work than, my manager will handle it, my agent will handle it, and give you the career the way that perhaps the model in the 70s or 80s or 90s or even early 2000s was based on.
And what better metric to have than that hard ticket sale? That's the most important thing of all. If you can prove that you've got hard ticket sales, really hard physical ticket sales, the sky's the limit for you as an artist.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more, because many of our guests and many of people in the music industry, and one of the things that I always tell my students, if you have an audience that is willing to pay for a performance to see you, you will always have a career in music, regardless of whether you're making albums, having hit records, or not.
Yep. And, one of the other areas that I really connected with this from an indie artist perspective was on how access to data helps indie and self-managed artists. And I quote, data democratization is something that's just like it's a signal of the future. This data is already accessible to lots of people kind of at the tippy top of the industry. It's important to me that data is accessible to everybody regardless of where they're at in their career, just so that they can kind of leverage it and get the best results possible. This is what you're talking about, Richard, of information. So this is an area which I can't agree with Benji more on, especially if you're a self-managed artist or band that's doing it on their own. Having access to that information at your fingertips is crucially important to your success today.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And again, insiders, this is something that comes down to the whole element of educating you into what is happening here and now and why you need to be aware of not only the changes that are going on, but to how important they are to your music career.
Hey, insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes and our space. You can also find us at social media at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter X, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Music Business Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.